Happy New Year, my friends! If you have been watching my channel for the past year, you know I have had a couple of reviews that have pitted two vinyl versions of the same kaiju against one another to determine which is the best option for a collection. Well, 2025 is no different, as I dusted off two figures from my collection that represent one of Godzilla's most iconic Showa images, the Soshengeki Goji, aka Godzilla 1968. The figures in question are the 2007 Bandai Creation version versus the 2006 Bandai Movie Monster Edition. Let's go! The version of Godzilla that I associate most with the monster, mostly due to his suit being used for almost 4 years straight, starting with 1968's Destroy All Monsters, where he resided on Monster Island in the not-too-distant future with his son and many of Earth's kaiju. When the Kilak invasion places him under their control, he along with his fellow monsters go on a world destruction tour until they are freed by the efforts of mankind, and they assemble at the foot of Mount Fuji to kill both Ghidorah and his alien handlers. In 1969's All Monsters Attack, aka Godzilla's Revenge, is technically the figment of Ichiro's active imagination, which places him on Monster Island where he and Minya cope with bullying, both there and in real life. Godzilla provides Minya with something that Ichiro lacks, a present father, and teaches them both to stand up to your tormentors through a good ass-kicking. 1970's glorious Godzilla vs. Hedorah, or Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, brings us back to the reality of the series, giving the king of the monsters his toughest opponent so far. Ghidorah, a sludgy, toxic creature from space, is one of the few menaces who does physical damage to Godzilla, not only causing him to bleed, but also costs him an eye and a horribly scarred hand and tons of smog inhalation. It should be noted that this version of Godzilla also uses his atomic breath to propel himself into the air to give chase to Hedorah, taking a wild swing at the otherwise psychedelic and dour film. And lastly, Godzilla on Monster Island, better known as Godzilla vs. Gigan, a film that combines wacky alien invasion plots, kaiju conversations, and a tag team fight with some of the most sleep-inducing slow-mo fights of the series. The Soshengeki suit is horribly worn out at this point, with tons of squib damage and torn material. In my opinion, the less said the better, but I am sure this entry has its fans. Quite the resume if you ask me. While most suits would either make some cosmetic changes from film to film or be redesigned altogether, Soshengeki remains the untouched, if not rougher visual cues from that run of films. He lies right in the middle end of that Theropodian monster to Muppet transition, and is the perfect balance. He feels the most heroic despite the Mega Goroji actively being much more in action. What remains of his classic suit is a decaying head now on display, a fascinating, if not sad, remnant from the classic era. The fact that this has survived the decades where many other suits have not is a symbolic of its resilience both on screen and off. In my opinion, if you love this era of movies, you should not deny yourself this version. He's essential for the Destroy All Monsters diorama we all threaten to make in our heads, but never fully realize. But the big question is this: do you choose the 2007 Bandai Creation version or the 2006 Bandai Movie Monster Series? Let's explore as these two go head to head. Right off the bat, you must be saying there's an obvious difference in size, and yes, Bandai Creation's Godzilla 68 is a head taller than the Movie Monster one, coming in at 7 inches. In several ways, this will give the same type of impressions that the Playmates offerings have done in the past, but we'll get to that during the actual sculpt segment. Both figures are cast in that dark, almost black charcoal-based vinyl. It may be hard to see all the details on screen as my lighting wasn't great for this filming, but in hand, despite its dark hue, the details still are prevalent on his keloid hide. Bandai Creation has a more vibrant set of colors, the pink mouth and the silver dorsal fins on the back. It descends all the way down to the curly tail tip. But yeah, the silver is just enough on the dorsal plates, leaving the charcoal center exposed as it should be. Focusing on the face, the eyeballs are painted in a fairly bright white with black pupils, complete with white shine dots in the center. His mouth is a vibrant bubblegum pink, flanked by white teeth. The claws have a spritz of white on the tips, and on the toes, again, apologies if this is too dark. Look at that face though, it really pops. He's fairly identical in colors to the Bandai Movie Monster Series, which we'll turn our attention to now. Same charcoal black skin, with a more modest spray of silver lining the dorsals, again just on the outer edges, and it ends a few segments before the tails end. Not sure why this is an issue with Bandai and tails, but rarely do you get the paint traveling to the last point on their figures. And all in all, when compared to the Bandai Creation version, paint feels much more subdued here. The sternum line gets a muted grayish spray down the center, as does his nails on his fingers, which feels more natural. His toes get the same treatment but feel more generous due to their overall size. Now, let's look at this dude's mug. Same idea with the eye as Bandai Creation, the white graced by a black pupil and a white dot in the center. Here, the eyes feel more upturned, or maybe it's just me. The mouth also has a nice pinkish color with some nicely detailed white on the teeth. The mouth feels better painted here, but I can't decide if that has more to do with the way it's sculpted, lending more shadow to the bounce off the colors. Switching up to the sculpt, clearly as I pointed out, the 2007 Bandai Creation has quite a bit of height over the 6-inch Movie Monster Series one, and I'll attribute most of that going to its neck length, which seems a bit longer than the latter. Looking at his profile, he looks good, but facing him straight on, he looks lanky and a little gawky, with his big grimaced mouth. The dorsal plates are excellent, they run down the back in the usual descending manner. The skin is sculpted well, with all those tiny crevices and such covering most of his body. His sternum line is not very prominent when compared to the Movie Monster version, and that's a shame somewhat. The legs, knees, feet are all well done. His arms are sculpted in a more animated pose, with his claws more graspy than his competitor. Now, that face, that's where we get to some of the flaws here. First, the massive toothy maw reminds me of the Black Hole Sun video from Soundgarden. Yikes. His eyes do look to have been lined to stare more forward than upturned. The brows and the head ridge are more prominent, as is the bridge of the nose. From the profile angle, his lower jaw conveys that bent-up bottom lip that would become more prevalent on later suits. It looks weird here, and I can't seem to put my finger on why. Inside his mouth, you can see the tongue clearly defined behind the rows of pointy teeth. Turning back to the head ridges, Bandai Creation's version are way more prominent than the Movie Monster series, but as you travel down, they become more familiar, if not slightly warped. If you look at it from the back angle, you can see the outer row flares outward more, rather than closely lining near the center. And finally, my real focus of ire on this is the tail. While I can commend the creation team of trying something different, it doesn't feel like a natural curve from what we typically see in Godzilla films, unless you count that stop-motion shot from 1954 film, where it's like flailing about. I honestly hate this. It may have been a decision in order to keep the figure contained in the restrictions of the package, but man, it doesn't gel nicely with the rest of the figure's vibe. It bugs me more than I should let it, because overall, I do feel like there's more right done with the sculpt than wrong. Underneath, we get that smoother ringed pattern that the tails usually have. Very reptilian, and the bottoms of his feet are pretty blank as usual. The hands are decent. The left hand looks as if the middle phalanges have a superglue accident, with the outer one stretched out trying to separate them, while the right hand has the hold my beer cupping formation. The neck does not do the facial expression any favors, making it look like Godzilla is suffering from acid reflux. Again, it's just a little too long. Let's shift our attention to the 2006 Movie Monster Series edition, which scales best with most of your other figures of the line. This feels way more proportionate overall. The profile view of his head feels more accurate to his on-screen image. Again, that upturned bottom lip is there, but not as pronounced as the Bandai Creation version. His head crest is much more subdued here as well, which is also accurate. When facing it straight on, he looks like he leapt off the screen and into your hand. Let's get a quick comparison shot, and there you can see how the mouth, specifically the teeth, are set in deeper, giving more depth with the deeper sculpted lines between them and his lower lip. The head crest also differs, as I pointed out, much more apparent here, and from the side is where you see the bigger contrasts, with Bandai Creation's brighter mouth and larger eyes, raised brow, all showcasing the variances in the molds. Unlike the 2007 figure, the Movie Monster Series highlights that central sternum line, not just with paint, but more texture too. His neck is way better proportionate and features the suit depression wrinkles, which, if you know me, is always high marks. His arms, while basic in pose, as his fingers, strike at an image more reminiscent to the way he would have had them in the standard position. The feet are nothing to write home about, but the three-toe claws are there in a nice outward stance. The bottom of his feet have zero detail outside of the figure's info imprinted. The underside of his tail has that same ringed pattern traveling from his taint to tip of the tail. Dorsal fins are spot on, and when you view them from the backside, you can see the outer rows align much closer to the central spines and don't flare out like the previous figure. Bandai Creation's Godzilla 1968 wins over the Movie Monster Series here, sort of. He's got arm rotation up to a point. Because of his sculpt, his back obstructs full rotation, leaving his arms behind his back in the same manner that Titanosaurus does when he's getting zapped by the supersonic oscillator. It's not terrible, but it's also not common in most of all the time. His legs can do the full rotation fairly effortlessly. And where he one-ups the 2006 version, his tail, that ugly-ass tail, can rotate as well. More points of articulation than our next contestant. The Movie Monster version is your typical Bandai release. Arms can do the Watusi and rotate the full 360 at the shoulders. But his legs are a different story. They barely can make the full rotation. In fact, they stop right at the tail. Shocking. It's weird because it almost goes the full 360, but reaches a point where it can't go all the way around. Odd for a Bandai release. Huh. Again, no tail movement and absolutely no head movement, but still a good looking figure. Sucks to be you, buddy. Starting off with Godzi's buddy Anguirus, one who frequently collaborated with the Soshengeki suit. Again, Bandai Creation's just too tall for this line and dwarfs our spiky friend. It'll be tough to integrate this figure into any 6-inch vinyl collection. Movie Monster Series does the job better, and they look ready to go full slow-mo on Gigan and Ghidorah. But even better, these two will look just right on Monster Island, talking to one another. And while we have the 68 version out, we'll bring in the Playmates Baragon figure. In a lot of ways, this is more in common with the Bandai Creation. Here, he feels a little too large next to the Movie Monster Series Godzilla, pretty much rivaling him in physical girth as well. However, despite my disappointment with this figure's oddities from my review, he looks really nice in terms of color and sculpt. Sliding in the Bandai Creation figure, now the height of Godzilla fits in better. I'll say it again, the American released figures all have strange sculpting oddities, like Baragon's elongated cranium and Gorosaurus' snout and such. But the value of what you pay for these guys off the shelf exceeds those minor gripes. I mean, if we didn't have Bandai's concentrated efforts on the suits designs, these guys would have garnered high marks. Ghidorah, whom I've previously reviewed, is a remarkable sculpt from the Movie Monster Series line. My one criticism of the figure was his height, and was a bit on the short side, especially compared to the Movie Monster Series 68 figure. Next to Bandai Creation, he loses his intimidating presence altogether, thanks to Bandai Creation's giraffe neck. But again, if these are all you have access to, you could be doing a lot worse. However, when you put the Godzilla 68 Bandai Movie Monster Series next to Ghidorah, you get a little bit better scaling. Not great, as Ghidorah still skews a little too short, but still, it's much better on your shelf than what you would get with the Bandai Creation version, which towers over everybody else. These two look good together, and it's a great movie pairing if you're looking for something to reproduce that Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster shelf display. Taking it back to the Movie Monster Series vinyl I mentioned in my recent Gigan review, that I should have used this version of Godzilla to compare with the two, since this is a suit that was used in Gigan's debut film. Well, here it is. These are a nice pairing, both in size and sculpt and colors. Not much more to say here. Again, as was with Ghidorah, the height makes Gigan feel at a disadvantage with Bandai Creation 68. Godzilla would absolutely clobber him. No wait, he already does, size notwithstanding. So there you have it. The examination is complete. Both versions of Soshengeki are pretty damn good. I do have my preference, obviously, based on my critiques, but Jet Jaguar has yet to let his fists have their opinion. Let them fly, Jaguar. Four punches for Bandai Creation, 5 for the Movie Monster Series. Pretty close, if you ask me. And really, my summation of these two should have no strong impact on your own personal preference as to which you like better. While I am one who likes scale with my kaiju, something that wasn't really attempted in the original 8-inch monster line, the smaller format is perfect, not just for overall shelf synergy, but shelf space as well. On his own, the Bandai Creation is a great Godzilla figure to have and handle. He's the figure you'd bring and leave at your desk. He's cool, but you wouldn't hurt as much if something happened to him. So, in a battle of the two Godzillas, my winner is the Bandai Movie Monster Series. Don't cry, Bandai Creation. The Movie Monster Series has its flaws too. The lack of full leg swivel, no tail articulation, two things you have over him that are a bit of a letdown. But he wins on sculpting accuracy, size, and his paint works much better than the brighter colors you present. And that's it! Another Godzilla review in the books. If you like this vinyl versus review, let me know down in the comments. Submit your ideas for future comparisons and hit that like button to help support my channel. As always, I would appreciate your subscription so I can showcase many more figure reviews and retrospectives from the Showa era. Thanks for watching.